Thank you, Stella. So, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. So yeah, Stella did an amazing introduction on who I am, so I'm not going to bother with this. I'm Associate Professor at the Cyprus University of Technology, the co-director of MATLAB, which is the Media Arts and Design Lab, and also I'm an affiliate member of Science, the research group that you're currently in. So I consider myself to be a digital artist and also a storyteller, as well as a researcher and an educator. So today, I am planning to tell you two stories. But before I do that, I want to set some context into what exactly I'm going to be talking about. So does anybody, obviously famous movies, does anybody understand what these movies have in common? Yeah, not exactly. So they are all based on books. And I don't know if anybody, has anybody seen these movies? Raise your hand if they have. Or maybe one of them. Keep your hands up if you actually read the book as well. Okay, so some of you have. And keep your hands up if you were annoyed that the movie was different from the book. Interesting. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that there is a very good reason why the movie was different from the book. And the fact is that they are actually different mediums. And creators, when they actually start writing or telling a story through a screen or the cinema, they need to utilize the engagement advantages that each platform offers. So if, for example, we start looking at books, we're going to see that through a book, you have a deep access to the character's internal thoughts. You read the story.
Disconnected.
Something was disconnected. You read the story, and then you can read about what the characters think, something that obviously you cannot do in a movie. You have a direct engagement with the reader's imagination. So when two people are reading the same book, probably they're not imagining the same characters, the same settings, the same space that the story is taking place. So this is the job of a good author, to kind of work with your imagination so it can put this information inside your brain and you form the story inside of your head. Then also, obviously, there is control of pacing. A reader can sit there and reread something if they're not clear, or they can completely proceed if they feel like, okay, this is an action sequence I'm not really interested in. And there's also the narrative flexibility where you can jump around from various sections, stories, characters, background stories. So all of these things are advantages in books. Whereas if we look at movies, instead of having like insight into the internal thoughts of characters, we have actors who are performing the characters. So you develop empathy with these characters through the voice and the facial expressions of these actors. There is visual storytelling, there are cinematic techniques that they kind of show you the world, which is an interpretation of the person who created the movie. And there is not much imagination in your own head of how these things look. Instead, you're looking at what the creator wants you to see. Obviously, editing and pace kind of shapes the whole experience. So what I'm getting at is that we're talking about two completely different mediums. And just like movies and books, there are plenty of other mediums with their own unique characteristics. So what we do at MATLAB, we actually explore new forms and experimental forms of storytelling, experimental mediums that kind of combine a few things together. They combine immersive theater, they combine new technologies, and they combine play. I mean, you can see a couple of examples from the kind of works we did. And today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our methodologies that we engage in telling these stories. So I call it immersive storytelling, and it always takes place, our experiences always takes place in hybrid spaces. When I talk about hybrid spaces, I mean spaces which have a physical aspect and also a digital aspect. So by using technology, you kind of have two worlds which coexist. They are site-specific, so they take place in a specific room. They're set up to be in a specific room. They are participatory, so that means the person who's engaging in these stories, they need to participate, they need to actively take a role or actively investigate, so the story progresses as the participant does actions in the space. They are social, so it's usually an experience which has more than one participant at the same time. And they are transmedia, which means it takes place over multiple mediums. That mediums could be like a website, virtual reality, physical space, could be like a comic book. There are various examples. Now, the thing is, as technology progresses and new mediums become available, this is one of our motivations for conducting this sort of research, is that we've noticed that artists and creators, they kind of migrate into these new mediums, but they carry engagement methodologies from their previous mediums. One very good example is when when virtual reality became available, and then you had people moving from cinema into VR, they were trying to get the knowledge they had from cinema and directly integrate it into VR, which is a completely different medium. As we realize, books are different, movies are different, new mediums that includes VR have different methodologies. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you two examples of experiences that we created, and I'm going to share our process just to show you how we do it. So I'm going to start with work we did, which is called The Last Play. This was a work which we presented in 3 different festivals. It was actually completed in 2021, and then through iterations, we improved it and show it in various other spaces. So this work starts through a website. What happens is you're firstly engaged by going into this website. You don't really know what is going on here. This is the office of Raymond Douglas. He's a theater director. And as you start investigating the website, as you start opening drawers, what was really important for me here is I wanted to rethink the VR headset as an element of storytelling in a space. Usually, when you go to an experience and you see a VR headset, the VR headset constitutes the world. So you are in this reality, you get the headset, you put it on, and then suddenly you are somewhere else and you're supposed to interact with this alternative other reality. But that kind of troubled me. I did not like this approach, that the fact that it's 2 separate realities and you have to jump from one into the other. So the way that I approached this is I said, you're actually inside the story world already. You are a scientist, you are in this lab, you are investigating what actually happened here. And by using the VR, you are actually entering this simulated world and figuring out what's going on. So outside of the VR headset, the people around you are still in the same story space as you are. It's not like when you are outside here in science and you have a VR headset. People are here, you are in the world space, in the VR space. People outside the VR space are people who are visiting the exhibition. In that specific scenario that we did, the people outside the VR space were actually in the same story world as you. So you could actually communicate with them and say, hey, can you see what I'm seeing? And you can discuss with them while the experience was taking place. Now, puzzles were constructed to be collaborative. So that means that the person in the VR space had to work with the people outside of the VR space in order to progress the story. So for example, as I mentioned, there was a train that you could take in the VR space to take you from one place to the other. That space needed to be booted up through the terminal that was inside the room. So you have to provide information to the people outside and tell them, hey, put this, power up the train, take me to that place, and they were doing it manually. So they were hacking the space, they were hacking the system, they were hacking the AI, and kind of taking you to where you're supposed to go. So the narrative in this situation was told in two different ways. As I mentioned in the beginning, there was also a tablet that kind of contained the information in a language which you could not understand. So there was a way to decipher it. And then when you deciphered it, you realized that one of the scientists, the digital clone that was in the space, he kind of wrote his own story of what actually happened in the space. And he did not like the idea of what was happening inside, and he was writing a diary and releasing it outside. However, when you start exploring the space, you realize that what the scientist is writing and what you're actually finding out in the world are contradictory. They didn't match. So there were two perspectives on these stories. And you had to really dig deep into understanding what was going on in the space and comparing it with the story of the scientist in order to figure out which one was the correct, or basically that every story has two sides. And that kind of led to this conclusion that at the end of the experience, the participants were asked to make an ethical choice that determined the end of the story. So these are part of the diary. So let me just show you, for example, this is the end. So in the concluding section, they had to decide whether they wanted to delete the simulation, essentially killing the artificial intelligence system along with the digital clones of real people. So you had to actually weigh what the consequences of what you are actually doing. These are people who think they are alive, even though they are digital and they are clones and they exist in a simulated world, they are conscious. So would you be okay for them to stop existing by pressing the delete button? Or would you rather release everyone into the stream, which is like the future version of the internet? So it kind of put you to choose between these two ethical dilemma, and each one has to make their own decision whether they will to kill the simulation or release them. So just to conclude, so these are a few credits. Again, this started as a student project, and we elaborated and worked on it in MATLAB and released it subsequently later. So coming back to this thing that we did, what are the kind of conclusions we reached when you start to deal with storytelling in hybrid spaces? Now, it is very important, essentially, to design for agency. You are not designing anymore for passive participants, people who are sitting down in a cinema screen and just watch. You're not designing for people who are imagining like a book in their own life. And you are designing for people who are actively participating in an experience. So the story should not be told. It should not be narrated. It should not essentially be, you put on the headset and you have people talking to you and passively offer you information. Instead, in order to form a connection with the story, you need to put the effort, explore, and piece together. Now, this is not something new. This is something that has been done has been happening in computer games for a long time before that. So it says it is essentially an extrapolation of the same methodologies that video game makers use in order to engage and keep engaging the users. But also here, you need to take into consideration a few more things, like multisensory experiences, for example. This is not, you're not sitting in front of a computer screen anymore, but you are engaging with the whole body. You're using an interface which its main advantage is the fact that it is embodied and immersive. So embodied means you're using your actual body to interact with the experience. So you need to take into advantage all of that. And frame and design the experiences in order to take advantage of these multisensory experiences and multisensory techniques of interacting in the world. And that actually, in our experience, extends beyond just the time of the experience, but also it's very important to have something that happens before and something that happens after. So if it's going to be an experience that it take an hour, it needs to start from before in order for the people to slowly shift in, and then it needs to follow up with something else after. Now, the other thing that we noticed is that when you are in an experience like that, you need to carefully navigate and shift between the various immersive stages and phases. And what I mean with that, let's imagine that someone is trying to solve a puzzle. That means they're actually immersed into the state which we called ludology. Okay, so it's like you are in play. You are concentrating and thinking, okay, so where does this each puzzle needs to go? And if at the same time, someone else is trying to tell you pieces of information of the story, that's completely lost. Nobody can exist in two immersive states at the same time. So you're either finding out story elements or you are solving puzzles. So, and in order for these things to happen, because there are multiple immersive states that happen in an experience like that, you need to carefully understand them and make sure that you shift out of one before you shift into the next one. And finally, another information that we discovered is that if you're using a transmedia approach, so you tell the story through various mediums, and you have the people, you have a fragmented story, complete in each medium, but fragmented that kind of fits together, it allows a deeper engagement and a more nuanced and complex narrative for the people to uncover. So putting all of this together, it was what we used and kind of works for us. Yeah, if anybody's more interested about these or any of the other works we've done, I mean, both of these works have been published. They presented at ICEA, and also we have a journal application on digital creativity that tells the work that we've done, which covers a lot more of the experiences that we cover in that. Okay, so 35 minutes exactly. Happy to answer any questions. No.
I would like to add something. Do you have any metrics, let's say, to measure things like engagement, or maybe the fact that you have some new things in play, let's say, creates new metrics to assess, let's say, I use engagement again, but maybe it's not engagement anymore, it's something else.
So, okay, the research methods that we used for this, essentially to come up with our conclusions, is the following. So, we did a lot of self-ethnography. So we kind of, as we're building and iterating through the spaces, we kind of discovered what works and what doesn't work through small groups of experts in the lab. So we tried and tried and tried. And then we showed this at a number of festivals. And every time we were doing observation of the people and how they were interacting in the space. And also we were conducting small informal interviews and collecting data from the participants after the experience was conducted. So we don't have like a huge study where we ask like questionnaires and doing that, because we consider this to be very subjective, and it's just like artworks. It's very difficult to measure stuff and measure engagement and try to understand how people comprehended a complex story. So these ways we discovered it works for us best.
Okay. Because I'm thinking of, because you mentioned video games at some point, which provide rich data in terms of competition, stories, and I mean, which players do which stories and stuff like that. And I was wondering whether this kind of information is also accessible in that case because it's a data based, let's say, experience. So maybe you have also data that you can.
So you're thinking, for example, Telltale, where you have like percentages of how many people did this and did that. This is the kind of thing that you're.
Just wondering, to be honest,
Yeah.
if jointly with qualitative data that you collect from experts and interviews, we have some like raw data, let's say, that either come together one another or show like some different.
Yeah, we actually haven't done that, but it might be a good idea at some point to investigate when we fix. But it needs to be done, I guess, at a smaller scale. And the thing is, because we create these experiences to be in location-based, it's very difficult for smaller scale experimentation. Is the fact that half of the thing is missing if we try to do a research in a lab. So it can only be complete when the whole experience is set up as it's meant to be set up. So yeah, it needs to happen when we show it. So it's difficult to get it done, but I get your point, and it might be something to try in the future. Manuel.
Well, I can remember, I think we were showing it 2 years ago at the Loop Festival. And what was for me so impressive was, I mean, you mentioned it that you have this kind of different medias and you have these different interfaces and that people are working together. So it's not that you are alone in this kind of immersive setting, but it's actually that you are dependent and somebody is actually finding or decoding the system to give you enough information so that you can actually move forward in the virtual world, right?
Yeah.
And I think this was really amazing because even though there's just one person who had the headset, but actually I was depending on others who were helping me then actually to get the right code and actually that I can actually move on further. And then all this kind of discussion that, because they could see on a stream in which kind of environment we were in at that time, so they actually could also help and could also see, and I loved this setting a lot. So it was not constructed. Now we do a little bit of collaboration. It was really like going into a storyline, and we only can actually solve it somehow together.
Yeah.
And I was missing this somehow now in your presentation, because I was thinking for me this was one of these main experiences that I actually had.
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually a very valid point. The fact that, yeah, collaboration was actually one of the most important elements that we noticed. The fact that
participation does not mean that. This is actually what I wanted to say. Participation means I participate in something, but I can also do it alone.
Yeah.
And what was actually this really extremely expressive moment was that I was actually depending on those who were helping me to crack the riddle, actually.
Great. Thank you for the feedback. Yeah. Excellent.
Just 2 points. Thank you for your talk. One is regarding terminology, as this is used in academic papers and we use in academia in general. I think there are 2 terms that should be included regarding narrative. One is the distributed narratives, which exists at different places at different times. For example, a travel blog is a narrative which is not linear and could go, be constructed and encoded in that sense. And the other one which fits very well to your research is the ergodic narrative of video games. Where
the which one? Sorry, embodied. Ergodic. Yes.
It's from ergon and odos. Based on the act of the user, you get a different path.
Yeah.
And because you have exactly the same thing, especially with the game that you have a different output or you could choose the fate, that's a term that should be used.
Yeah.
And another point, another question that I have is because you're using, it's the whole aesthetic experience, and because it's site-specific, when we talk about site specificity, I would expect the hotel to be an actually abandoned hotel where maybe in a pre-planned, unlock the whole physical experience.
Yes, me too. If you find an abandoned hotel, you can, I mean, I wish I could. And you are right. It's one of the things that we kind of always aim to do. And we also design, ideally, we would love to design experiences based on the place. And finding the place first always is our priority. But, for this one, we kind of had to, it was an afterthought because we had to present it in a specific venue, in a specific festival. These are the places that they gave us. But I guess, the moment we can find budget, which is one of the main issues for this kind of stuff, and we can actually rent and get the spaces that we love, that would be the best solution. Thank you for the terms. I'm aware with Arseth's work about ergodic literature and everything. I'm trying to avoid using those terms because they are a bit confusing, especially if I'm presenting to people who are not really familiar with that. But obviously, they're in the papers. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your definition of a story?
A definition of a story.
Of your perspective.
Nah.
What is a story?
Okay, it's a good question, open question. A story, I would say, is because you have the story, you have a narrative, and they're all interconnected. But I would say that the best approach to answer this question would be that when you start contextualizing something and when you start telling someone or writing a paper, is to define them in the beginning. So I cannot answer what is a story without answering what is a narrative and without answering, every other linked question together. But if I was going to do that, I would probably say that the story is what actually happens from the perspective of the person who is experiencing it, which is not the same as the narrative, because I'm going to define the narrative in a different way. So, it's definitions. There's no correct or wrong answer, I think.
So I'm concluding that a story can be memories.
It can be memories. Yeah, it's a personal interpretation of,
In the narrative, if let's say I'm writing a book about something, I'm writing it because, let's say, or I imagine it, or I pass through that situation, maybe. So I conclude that most of the times stories are memories and things that we may listen, but if we listen to other people's memories, because if people tell that story to us, that memory, and we tell that memory to someone else, the story changes every time Yeah,
so it's not fixed, what you're saying. Yeah.
What's your opinion?
Yeah. We can discuss it after. It's a long conversation, though. But I get your point, and it's very difficult to discuss definitions of words. I mean, people define them in different ways. So I would always say that the best way is to, every time you start talking about something, you define it in the beginning. So it can be very clear for the people following to do. Yes, I haven't done it. You're right, but that's a good approach to do it.